Hey there, my name is Darren, and today in the garden we're going to be focusing on one of my favorite vegetables to grow, squash and zucchini, and talking about the dreaded pest that can actually kill these plants if left untreated. That is the squash borer. So the squash borer typically emerges from the ground, at least here where I live in Wisconsin, sometime as early as say mid-June through about early July. And once they do emerge, they're red moths is what they look like, and they quickly look for a host plant and will continue their life cycle, which is to lay more eggs, and then the eggs hatch into larvae. They bore through the stems of these plants, and if not, again, treated or removed, they can potentially kill those plants before they mature and then fall off and go back into the soil to start that whole cycle again. So I'm looking at some of my plants right now, and while overall they are in great shape, I am seeing, even with my protective measures, because the squash borer moths do come out a couple times during the season, I am finding a few of these eggs, and I'm going to show you a close-up here of what I'm looking at. And it's right here. We can get that zoomed in. There's the egg, and what I'm going to do is carefully take that off with my thumbnail and then squish it between my fingers and destroy it. So again, here is a look at the tiny egg you can see on the tip of my finger. It is very, very small and hard to detect, but they have a little bit of a stickiness to them, so you can carefully scrape them off without them necessarily falling, but you do have to be careful. And then I just kind of squish it in the with my fingernail and destroy it, so it has no chance of hatching. But this is a tedious process, and something that maybe not everybody's willing to do. But if you want to overall reduce your numbers of this pest on your plants, that is one of the best things that you can do, is remove the eggs before they hatch. A lot of times they like to lay their eggs, the moths lay their eggs at the base here or underneath. They're a lot of times not in your direct line of sight. They like to lay them underneath. So you really have to look carefully, and sometimes I will just use the edge of a blade of a knife and carefully scrape them off and remove them. So I did find one of my plants that has a couple of larvae that have already hatched, and or the eggs that have hatched into the worms. This is very early in the process, but if you look carefully at the base, you could see some of this frass that's coming out. This is where they are boring through and pushing their excrement actually behind them, and it's coming out at the base of the plant. Here's another area here where you can see some of this frass that's come out. So I know that there's a borer in here. What I usually will do is, depending on where these worms have entered the plant, in this case, I will actually just literally cut off this little leaf here to potentially remove it from the worm. Now in this case, I do believe that the worm is actually still in the stem. This is where it entered, but that is some of the damage, the early damage that this borer has done to this plant. Then for the areas where I do believe eggs have hatched and there are borers, as you can see here, we do have a little bit of evidence that there are some borers in here. What I like to do, this is early on, but I like to just go in here in some of the openings and try to scrape in there and potentially kill the worms. They're very tiny early in the season like this, but it doesn't take long for them to grow fairly quickly, and you'll start to see more of the frass as they become more mature within the stems of the plant. Again, this one's pretty good right now, but if I were able to, I would go into some of the openings that they have created by boring, and I would put the tip of the knife up in there and really just kind of do this, poke at it and try to get up in where the worm is to kill it so that it cannot continue to damage the plant. So I realize this can be a rather tedious process, but it is a great way to help limit the overall damage that this pest can do to your plants. The other thing I will mention is the later in the season that these get into the plants, the better really, because when they are young and still small, and if they get these borers in them, it's almost certainly going to kill the plants. But as they get larger, they can tolerate these borers more so. Again, as the plants are more mature, they will continue to put out roots that will help to keep the plant alive. So this is one of the main things that I do throughout the summer, just try to limit how many of these borers actually get into my plants. The best thing to do is to avoid them getting the eggs on them altogether. Again, that will be a video that I do next season, as that part of this process has already passed. So if this is something that you're trying, the best of luck. I know how frustrating these pests can be with your squash and zucchini. Well, that's all I have for now. Until next time in the garden.